Thank you, and welcome to today's Candidate Forum, brought to you by a partnership between City Club of Central Oregon and the League of Women Voters. Voters is a nonpartisan grassroots political organization encouraging informed and active participation in government. They never support or oppose any political party or candidate. Today, we are hosting the Democratic candidates for Secretary of State. My name is Mike Fisher, and I'm honored to serve as the moderator for today's forum. By day, I'm a business analyst. By night, I'm a sportscaster, stage actor, MC, host, producer of the syndicated The Ultimate Oldies Show, originating from 88.9 KPOV in Bend, Oregon, and a radio and print journalist. First, I'd like to thank and give a shout out to City Club's platinum sponsors, Brooks Resources and St. Charles Health System. Without their support and the support of our other annual sponsors, we would not be able to bring you today's live stream. In this unprecedented time, City Club is temporarily moving from live gatherings to completely online offerings that are free to the public. City Club is committed to continuing conversations of consequence for our region. As we adjust to the new normal, we hope you'll continue to engage and support their efforts. If you watch today and you're enjoying it, please consider making a donation. You can do so at City Club's website at cityclubco.org. Today's live stream would not be possible without Hand in Hand Productions. City Club is proud to partner with Matt Hand as we venture into this brave new digital world. Thanks so much for all you are doing for our community, Matt. We do truly appreciate it. We want to thank the Democratic candidates for the Secretary of State, Shemia Fagan, Jamie McLeod-Skinner, and Mark Haas, participating in today's forum. We appreciate the gravity of committing to run for office. Our goal is to provide an opportunity for fair and civil discourse. A few words about the office. The Oregon Secretary of State works to maximize your participation, your voter participation, and is a watchdog for public spending, makes it easier to do business in Oregon, and preserves and promotes Oregon's history. The Secretary of State employs 220 full-time, part-time, and temporary employees. The Secretary oversees the functions of 4 program divisions: the archives, audits, corporations, and elections, and 3 support divisions: business services, information services, and human resources. By the way, Oregon is the only state where the Secretary of State is responsible for auditing public spending. And in addition, the Secretary of State serves on the State Board of Education as an ex officio member and serves with the governor and treasurer on the State Land Board, managing and overseeing Oregon's Common School Fund. Oregon does not have a lieutenant governor. Therefore, the Secretary of State serves in that capacity. We will start with opening statements. Each candidate will have 2 minutes, and then each question is rotated, so each candidate will answer the question in a different sequence. At the end, each candidate may have up to 2 minutes for closing statements in reverse order of the opening statements. And again, on behalf of the League of Women Voters and the City Club of Central Oregon, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with our opening statement. And Jamie, by the luck of the draw, you have the first opening statement. Your 2 minutes start now.
Thank you so much for hosting. As a kid, I watched my mom work hard, but sometimes not eat dinner because we didn't have enough food in the house. I had classmates as a child who talked to me about their refugee experiences. And when I came out in the late 80s, my community was shunned by mainstream politics. That's why making sure all voices are heard is so critically important to me. I built on my public school education in Southern Oregon, but I've used the privilege of my education to serve others throughout my life, from my civil engineering degree from RPI to my master's in regional planning from Cornell to my law degree from the University of Oregon. I didn't take the corporate route. Instead, I chose public service, repairing schools and hospitals in post-war Bosnia and Kosovo, managing refugee resettlement, helping people become citizens and vote, fighting climate change, and making government more effective and more accountable through audits and organizational development. I did that as frontline staff, as an executive manager, and 9 years of elected office experience in both urban and rural areas. It's the Secretary of State's job to make democracy work. And I've done that work and have aspects in all aspects of the job. The Secretary of State is essentially an executive management position with oversight in several divisions. And I appreciate you giving a backdrop on that so I don't have to take the time to go through it. But the Secretary of State ultimately needs to understand how government actually works, not just how laws are made, how to manage teams and budgets, and how to provide culturally appropriate services for diverse populations. I'm the only one in this race with that experience, from executive management in government and nonprofit to a track record of developing and implementing land use and water policies that positively impact our climate and our environment. I'm a natural resource attorney, elected board member of the Jefferson County Education Service District, and appointed member of the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. We need a bridge builder to move beyond the toxic culture of the Capitol, and I have the breadth and depth of experience for this role in a time that calls for a different kind of leadership.
Thank you, Jamie. Jamie, appreciate your opening statement. And now we will move on to Mark for your 2 minutes.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I wish we were under different circumstances, obviously, but we are in some very difficult times right now. I think these are the times that focus a spotlight on leaders. Are they moving fast enough, decisive enough? Are they doing the right thing? Because it's one thing to lead when the economy is booming, when unemployment is low, when everything is going great. It's quite another to lead in tough times when things are terrible, like they are now. The economy is crumbling, people are losing their jobs, the demand for government services is skyrocketing. I've been tested in tough times before, in the recession of 2002 and again in the Great Recession of 2008. Both times, Oregon has come back. But both times, there were painful decisions to make about budget cuts and about getting people back to work and keeping our government running, from universities to programs for seniors to keeping state prisons open. I responded with passing the Rainy Day Fund and the Education Stability Fund. We didn't have reserves 20 years ago, and we paid the price. Today, Oregon's reserves are more than $3 billion. And I can tell you, as the chair of the Senate Revenue Committee, this is a big deal. It might not solve all of the state's budget problems that are coming ahead, but it will be a nice cushion. I also helped bring our state back by helping people who suffered during that recession, passing a higher minimum wage, paid sick leave, and the Oregon Promise, which provides free community college to high school graduates. As I've said before, these are not talking points for me. These are things that I did. These are results. Those are big ideas that are now in Oregon law. I have some big ideas ready for the Secretary of State's office, which I think needs to be overhauled too, from ranked choice voting to a new Office of Cybersecurity. These are big things, but I believe I'm the one person in this race who has a history of doing big things. I've been tested and I passed those tests.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Shemia, your opening statement, please.
In 1997, I was a 15-year-old kid, and my brother was driving us to East Portland to see our mom for the first time in about 3 or 4 years. My dad was a single parent raising us in Eastern Oregon in little towns Dufur and the Dalles, and my mom had been battling meth and heroin addiction and living on and off the streets of East Portland. But she finally had a home, and she invited us to come visit. And my brother pulled up to this big, beautiful, kind of Victorian style house with a huge wraparound porch. And she greeted us and then walked us around to the front steps. But instead of walking up the steps, she dropped to all fours and she crawled underneath the porch. And then she invited us into her home. And my brother and I dropped to all fours and crawled under the porch behind her. And while sitting on a sleeping bag, she showed us a box that she kept with her that was full of pictures of us and letters from us. And I know that that box showed her that even on her darkest days, an ordinary life was within reach. And so she fought for it. And when she passed away in 2014, my mom had been clean for almost 6 years, and she was living in the first house she had ever owned. And the minister who performed the service at her funeral in Echo, Oregon, a little cemetery, said, Trish, that was my mom's name. She said, Trish reached the place of an ordinary life, just an ordinary life, a job and a house and a dog. But it didn't just happen to her. She fought for it with everything she had in her. I've been in public service in Oregon for the past decade, from school boards to the Oregon House to the Oregon Senate. And I've centered my political career on knowing that there are people out there facing barriers that keep them just from the stability of an ordinary life. But what keeps us fighting is the promise of progress towards stability and an ordinary life. And that's what brings me to the race for Secretary of State, the person whose job is to literally make our democracy work. Because when every vote is accurately counted and every eligible voter can vote, when democracy works, then progress is always within reach.
Thank you, Shemia, and thank you, Mark, Shemia, and Jamie for your opening statements. I will ask the questions. You will have 2 minutes to respond. And again, we will rotate who goes first. So Shemia, you will have the opportunity to answer this question first. What do you think is the most important mission of the Secretary of State? And what would be your top 3 priorities if elected?
The top mission of the Secretary of State is our Chief Elections Officer. Nothing else in our democratic institutions can be expected to work if our democracy doesn't work. And I think that we're about to see, unfortunately, on the national scene, how fragile the right to vote really is in this country, like we just saw in Wisconsin last week. People had to literally risk their lives and the lives of their loved ones to go and exercise their right to vote because they didn't want to expand vote by mail. And so our chief elections officer here in Oregon has to be a leader and to make sure that we show that Oregon elections are secure, they're paper ballots, and they can be audited anytime because we keep those paper ballots. I've been a part of the organizations that have expanded the right to vote here in Oregon. In 2013, my first session in the Oregon legislature, I sat down with then Secretary of State Kate Brown and some voting rights advocates in the BUS project to map our path to passing automatic voter registration, which we passed in 2015, the first in the nation. So we have to make sure that we protect that progress. And so number one, we have to make sure that our elections are secure and accessible, particularly in this time as we face a global pandemic and elections workers who are typically packed into an elections office counting their ballots. I do believe that we should look at ranked choice voting as an option to actually make our elections more reflective of the views of Oregonians, over a third of whom are not affiliated voters. And then finally, misinformation is the biggest threat that we face. And so I had proposed in this race that we take the Director of Office of Civic Education and actually bolster that role to go beyond elementary school curriculum and the Kid Governor program to help all Oregonians be re-educated on how to spot misinformation, to make sure that when our democratic institutions are working as they are in Oregon, that Oregonians know that and aren't fed misinformation from false news sources and social media.
Great. Thank you. Jamie, same question. What do you think are the most important mission of the Secretary of State, and what would be your top 3 priorities if elected?
The most important aspect of the role is to make government work. And that's why all the different components feed into that. The top 3 for me are protecting our democracy, and that's through election security and integrity. It's through making sure government is accountable, and that's through the audit process. And it's also making sure we're safeguarding our environment and our natural resources. And a large tie-in to that is partially the audit process, but also the State Land Board. So with regard to election security, I proposed last year the appointment of an election security officer to think like a hacker and make sure that we were being proactive. We have a better system than many other states here in Oregon with our paper ballots, but there's still things that we need to maintain vigilance on, and there's still steps we need to take to make sure we're protecting our democratic process. Working with county clerks to do that public outreach and helping people to filter misinformation and not be spreading it. Also making sure we have a national presence. And that's something that the Secretary of State, Oregon Secretary of State, used to do and can do again. With regard to election integrity, it's making sure that everyone has access to their vote and that folks who can become voters go through that process. That's work I've done in the past. But making sure there's outreach, working with community-based organizations, multilingual support, education, and this is especially for folks who have housing insecurity and unaffiliated voters as well. We do need to increase participation, and that's not just overall, but also decrease the discrepancies between different demographics. So there's a lot of things that need to go through the legislature where we haven't had the leadership. Everything from dropping the voting age, although that would also be a constitutional change, same-day registration, making postmarks count, looking at intent 3, the ranked choice or star voting. We need a public discussion on that, and making sure that people should be able to register at all state agencies. The health of our democracy depends on that. Through audits, I've talked about not just financial, but performance audits, equity audits, sustainability audits, information security audits, using a health and safety lens to make sure we're addressing, making government accountable and addressing the needs of all Oregonians. I was trained in the Baldrige model, where you look at both what and how, and bringing that to the process. And then again, through the State Lands Board, developing a policy to make sure we're sustaining our natural resources for the long run and having a long-term sustainable view for our public waterways and our lands.
Great. Thank you. Mark, same question. Most important mission of the Secretary of State, and what would be your top 3 priorities if elected?
By far, the most important mission is election security in this day and age. I would set up an office of cybersecurity to look at the issues that are haunting election departments all over the world. I'm surprised there's not an office of cybersecurity in now. We have a vote by mail system that I'm unabashed gusher over. I think Oregon can be an ambassador to the rest of the country on vote by mail. But where we are vulnerable is in our database of registered voters. The firewalls that are there and exist now are merely in compliance with federal law, and they should be stronger. And that's where we need to protect registered voters who could be hacked, who could be dropped out of the system. And if you don't get a ballot, then that creates problems. And the technology experts that are working with me on this campaign strongly believe that it's not as safe as it should be. The same office could be used and would be used with me to stop election disinformation. The cybersecurity office will combat election disinformation by getting ahead of those intentional rumors and misleading campaigns, and that plagued the Oregon Elections Office just 2 years ago with viral social media posts. We need to get ahead of that. My top 3 priorities: an election cybersecurity office, stopping disinformation, same-day voter registration, and developing a new protocol for climate change on all audits so that we have an analysis of what every state agency is doing, how many people are driving, and how are you collaborating with the rest of state government in shrinking your footprint. I'm an advocate for public records. We need to revamp our public records advocate position. We need to start the test drive of taking Oregon out for ranked choice voting to see if that method of voting is as popular as vote by mail. I think it will be.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Next couple of questions will address voter questions with regard to voting. And Mark, you will have the opportunity to respond to this next question first. Do you support an independent citizens commission to reform redistricting of legislature and congressional districts with strict criteria that would favor voters instead of politicians and political parties?
I thought a lot about this. My first session in 2001, 2002 was a redistricting session, and I've looked at all kinds of different independent commissions and whether that would actually be better for our state. And I went through the 2011 session on redistricting, and I saw the legislature actually did it, and it was a bipartisan vote. But when I reflect on the constitutional requirement that the legislature do it instead of an independent commission, I stop at this inconvenient truth that while there's no egregious gerrymandering in Oregon, there is a problem. There is a problem with the legislature making these districts safer and safer by remapping the lines so that essentially you make really blue seats and really red seats. And what the two parties do is simply trade safe seats. I think a competition factor should be included into the commission style that is being proposed now. And I think that competition, where it's appropriate, should be one of the considerations when we do redistricting. I know voters are clamoring for this, and I agree with them that try to get the bipartisanship out of this. So the answer to your question is yes, I do support the concept of an independent commission redistricting our political districts.
Thank you, Mark. Shemia, same question, and I'll read it for you again. Do you support an independent citizens commission to reform redistricting of legislature and congressional districts with strict criteria that would favor voters instead of politicians and political parties?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I've heard Senator Hass give that response to that question before, and he previously did not support the measure that was going on the ballot. So that was a change. That's interesting. But people can obviously change their positions during a campaign. But I think that the big concern that I've heard from the League of Women Voters and Common Cause, who are looking into this is the fact that in 2011, when the legislature, just before I got there, when they voted on a redistricting package, so I think they did a really good job. They obviously did not do gerrymandering. Gerrymandering, by definition, is drawing lines to favor one political party or the other. And so obviously when you have a bipartisan bill, that did not happen. But a really glaring thing that they overlooked was not a single incumbent was drawn out of their district in 2011. And the factors already are very strong in ORS Chapter 188, which is where the redistricting factors are found. And one of the provisions that there cannot be any drawing of lines that benefits any political party or person or incumbents. And then any citizen of Oregon can challenge any map, whether done by the Secretary of State or by the legislature. And then the Oregon Supreme Court actually reviews that and then sends that back to the people. So I do think the process that we have right now in Oregon is working. If we ever got to a place where people saw problems like they have in Wisconsin, where the Republicans hold 2/3 of the legislative seats, and they have won less than 50% of the votes. Those are the kind of problems that Eric Holder and Stacey Abrams are out fighting against, these political gerrymandering. Here in Oregon, we don't have that problem. So this does seem a bit like a problem or a solution in search of a problem. But I do think that we need to make sure that whoever is doing redistricting, particularly if it's the legislature, is adhering to the factors in ORS 188. And if they are not, that those are put forward to the Oregon Supreme Court, where those judges have oversight and the ability to require the legislature or the Secretary of State to go back and fix those maps.
Great, thank you. And finally, Jamie, the same question. Do you support an independent citizens commission to reform redistricting of legislature and congressional districts with strict criteria that would favor voters instead of politicians and political parties?
So I think the nuance on this that we're hearing is we know there's a ballot measure going forward, and it's actually sponsored by the league. And so it's not clear if the question is specific to that ballot measure. I will say this, that the bottom line is we have to ensure free and fair elections. We have to ensure that our boundaries, our political boundaries, are fairly drawn through the redistricting process. That's an absolute. We do have some really solid criteria in there is currently in not just legislation, but in the books in our laws right now. With regard to the proposal being brought forward, the ballot measure, I'm not convinced that it actually is an improvement on what we've got. So the concern that people raise about redistricting and the problems that we're seeing across the country, those are not problems we've seen here in Oregon. And I think the proposed ballot measure is not a better system from what we have now at this time. Also, I think the point's well taken that we haven't seen a problem here in Oregon. The concept of making sure we have fair boundaries, absolutely, I support that 100%, and we need to be vigilant to make sure that's in place. The concern I have with the currently proposed ballot measure is ensuring that we're protecting the interests of communities of interest. So that's part of the requirement, is to keep communities of interest together. Right now, we have over time developed support for different communities throughout Oregon in the legislature. And so I think the system currently is robust enough. So I don't support what's on the ballot for this cycle. If we get to a problem, that we saw a problem going forward, then I would support a positive change and a step forward. But the other thing is the process, and I've got a process in place, a redistricting process, if it did come to me as Secretary of State, to make sure a fair process for all Oregonians.
Great, thank you. And Jamie, you'll have the opportunity to review this next question first. And again, it's related to voting. Oregon recently signed into law the National Popular Vote Interest Compact. What is your opinion on changing to the popular vote?
I support it. I think it's a good idea. I think we should move forward with it. What we've seen with the Electoral College, it has, we would have a different president right now, is a very stark statement about the value of one person, one vote. And so I think that concept of one person, one vote, it's fundamental to our democracy. And so I support that. I think it would be a good direction moving forward. I know it's a debate going on in Washington, D.C. And throughout the country, but I think it's a step forward.
Thank you. And same question, Mark. Oregon recently signed on to the National Popular Vote Interest Compact. What is your opinion on changing to the popular vote?
I've been an outspoken proponent of this long before Donald Trump ever came onto the scene. I finally was able to vote for it in the Senate in the previous session. I was one of the sponsors, and I do believe in one person, one vote. And I think this is something that we need to do. We need to now get a national movement carried forward and get the compact with Congress to make this reality.
Thank you, Mark. Shemia, same question.
I enthusiastically support the National Popular Vote Compact. In fact, I first heard about it in 2013 when I joined the Oregon House, and the House had passed the bill multiple times and had never even had a vote in the Senate because it kept getting killed by Democratic Senate leadership, oddly enough. But when I joined the Senate in 2019, I worked closely with National Popular Vote Oregon, Eileen Reevey and her group, and I was one of the senators that actually pushed for our leadership in the Senate to stop killing the bill, to put it on the floor of the Senate, to make the senators vote on it, even if they didn't have 16 Democratic votes. And I was proud to be part of the group that actually pushed that forward to finally make Oregon join the compact, despite the fact that it had passed multiple times in the House and never even had a vote in the Senate. The leadership had not been there in the Senate until I showed up in 2019. And so we did pass it with the three most powerful Democrats in the Senate voting no, with the Senate president, the majority leader, and the co-chair of Ways and Means all voting no. And yet we still passed it with Republican votes. And I think that was actually one of the selling points of it. When I talked to my brothers who live in Stanfield and Pendleton, who often vote Republican about this, I said, look, taking out the fact that now it's politicized about Donald Trump, think about the fact that you vote Republican in Oregon and how disincentivized and cynical you feel about voting in the presidential elections when you never feel like your vote's going to matter. If we pass and actually enter into the National Popular Vote Contract with enough states to equal 270 electoral votes, then a Republican in Echo or Stanfield or Pendleton, Oregon's vote will count as much in a presidential election than any swing voter in Pennsylvania or Michigan or Florida or Ohio. And that is the true one person, one vote. That concept was from the 1962 Supreme Court case, of course, Baker v. Carr. That one person, one vote is so fundamental to our democracy. And I'm a huge fan of the National Popular Vote and went on KATU News and defended it after we passed it in the Oregon Senate.
Great. Thank you. And one more question related to voters, and this came in as an audience question. And Shemia, you will have the opportunity to respond first. If the Secretary of State has to approve districting maps, as someone married to a person of color, my husband and I, a native Spanish speaker, are very concerned about making sure Oregon's gains in diversity are preserved. Yet we have seen little of public campaign materials available in languages other than English. If you are not willing to make a minimal effort to connect with families like mine while trying to get elected, how can we trust you to make good decisions that affect us if you're elected?
Well, and I appreciate that very much. And I'm proud to be endorsed in this campaign by the Pacun Latinx Farm Workers and Working Families Union. And we actually haven't put it out yet because we're working on it. But we have a census video coming out with Representative Teresa Alonso Leon, who endorsed me in this campaign, and me, and we're doing the census side by side. It's a lot of complicated pieces to put that together. So we're putting that out hopefully in the next couple of days, a bilingual version of putting out, talking about our census. But you're exactly right. That's been the big criticism of the legislative redistricting process, is it is not centered with Black and Indigenous communities and people of color and Latinx communities, because of course our redistricting process is about every person in Oregon, not necessarily every voter. That means, children, people who can or can't vote for various reasons. So it's every person in Oregon deserves equal representation. And this would be something that if the Secretary of State was to redraw the redistricting maps, I would do an entirely different process than the legislature, where they had, the legislature was the committee that was actually traveling around and listening. I would have a committee that was made up of racially diverse people. And I think it would be very important to not only have printed materials in other languages, PDFs and things, but actually live translators at events so that people could not only get the printed materials, but also have those same, actual live translations so they could follow along at those hearings and events.
Great. Thank you, Shemia. And Jamie, the same question. I'll try and paraphrase it a bit. Making a minimal effort to connect with families, printing documentation in both Spanish and English. If trying to get elected, how can we trust you to make a good decision that affects us if you're elected?
Well, this is easy because we've actually had our literature even pre free stay at home, stay safe. Our literature has been translated into 6 different languages, and we've made it available. It's in English. Most of our literature is English on one side, Spanish on the other, but we've also covered several other languages as well. And the 5 standard languages, the primary languages in the Portland metro area. So we've already done that. My website, Jamie for Oregon, is also got a Jamie for Oregon Espanol, which is the entire website's translated into Spanish. And so this is stuff that we've already done. This is especially important to me because, as I mentioned before, this is work I've done and working with refugee and immigrant communities. And this is also that distinction between what we're all going to say and what we're actually doing and what we have done. And I've worked with communities of color, with refugee and immigrant communities to help people access their right to vote, help people get access to information in the language that they're most comfortable with, in the language they speak at home. That's something we've done in this campaign. We did it in our 2018 campaign when we won almost 150,000 votes in the toughest part of the state for a Democrat to win, and won counties that Democrats haven't won in almost 50 years. It was because of our partnerships. And I'm very proud to be endorsed by Raíces, a young Latinx, a progressive group in Eastern Oregon. Yes, there are progressive groups in Eastern Oregon. And I actually just had a town hall session with one of their members and a council member from Hermiston last night, Roy Barron, where we talked specifically about the issues facing communities of color throughout the state. That's why what we've done in the transition to this virtual online forum, I'm not just talking about myself. I'm inviting folks to talk about how COVID-19 is impacting communities around our state, how we can make government better, and government can do a better job of listening, not just to those who have privilege and power now, but those who've been shut out and those voices who haven't been heard. And that's not just in rural areas, that's in metro areas as well. Communities of color, a lot of vulnerable communities are stepping forward. We're engaging people and having those conversations now and bringing those voices to the table.
Thank you, Jamie. And Mark, same question about diversity and printing of materials and documentations. If you are not willing to make a minimal effort to connect with families like mine while trying to get elected, how can we try to make good decisions that affect us if you are elected?
Well, like so many things in this race, I guess the answer is if you want to know how someone will perform in the future, look at how they've performed in the past. And my record, I'm very proud of working with communities of color. And probably the most recent one was in the Student Success Act that just passed in 2019. It was a transformational new law that will change school funding forever. And the money of about $1 billion a year will be spread out in all kinds of different ways. But what was important to me was we found 3 categories of African American, Latino, and Native Americans, where we actually, maybe for the first time in history, in any state, put money into these communities and said, no, we're not going to just pay lip service to these communities. You're going to pick them up and you're going to walk them down the hall and you're going to help them. Because it's just something that hasn't been done. And that was what I got into that bill. And it's very important. And I'm not talking about 10 cents. I'm talking millions of dollars to help these 3 categories. And it was very, very important to me that we do that. And I can see the slights every day. I see them with my own son getting handed a Chromebook from his middle school and bringing it home to do homework. And he does his homework on this interactive math, and that's because of the Audit system. But not all kids do, especially kids from struggling families. And so when they go to school the next day and those kids don't have their homework because they don't have wireless in their home, that's a slight. That's a slight that you don't think about all the time, but you take that and multiply it by 1,000 times, and it's no wonder these problems add up. So I guess the answer is actions speak louder than words, and my record is replete with helping these communities.
Thank you, Mark. Moving on to a different angle, and this question is regard to campaign contribution. Mark, you'll have the first opportunity to respond. Do you support campaign contribution limits, statewide candidates, and the ballot measures calling for limits of $500 and no corporate or labor union contributions unless through small donor committees?
I would support that. I've been working on this for many years. The measure that will go to voters in November was a bill that I was a chief sponsor of, SAR 18. And that will change the Constitution so that the kind of limits you're talking about can actually be set by local governments or state government without always being thrown out by a court as as a violation of our speech provision. Once we get that big log out of the road, then we can set the kind of limits that you're talking about. And I think they should be across the board limits, but having worked on this for years, I can tell you it's very nuanced. I think there should be exceptions for small donor PACs. And but the main thing we need to do is get these limits down so they're no longer in the stratosphere. And I've been close to this issue my whole career, and it's very important. I hope that everybody who's watching this votes on this and finds 10 other people to vote for this as well.
Thank you, Mark. Shemia, same question. Do you support campaign contribution limits for statewide candidates and for ballot measures, calling for limits of $500 and no corporate or labor union contributions unless through small donor committees?
So I support the ballot measure that is going on in November. I already voted for that as a senator to allow contribution limits. As Senator Hass mentioned, it's currently technically unconstitutional in Oregon, and we need to change that. I do support contribution limits. I don't know if $500 is the right place. My big concern with contribution limits is that we get so focused on having small contribution limits that we then don't allow candidates to raise enough money to pay their staff a living wage and provide them health insurance. I'm proud that I have 2 paid staff in this campaign. I pay them both a living wage and I give them both health insurance. And we don't rely on any unpaid interns because that limits the pool of people who can even apply for and be a part of campaigns and these jobs. I don't support concepts that equate corporate money with labor union money. Labor unions are the folks that are out there on the front lines right now during this pandemic that we are calling heroes, the grocery store clerks, the nurses, the folks going in from SEIU and cleaning hotel or hospital rooms and in some cases hotel rooms right now, the folks in AFSCME who are out serving our populations, the folks that are in the Oregon Employment Department. So I don't support equating contributions that those folks give little by little to their union per month as the same as a corporation. It's different when to have one person or one corporation giving $100,000 is different than 100,000 people giving $1. And so I do support the concept of small donor PACs that obviously would need to be fleshed out. And that's something as Secretary of State that I would have a lot of power in the rulemaking. And we would, of course, bring in multiple voices there. But we can't buy into the corporate America's scheme that, a corporate donor is the same as a labor union donor, because it's not. Labor unions only have money because of the grassroots donations from hundreds of thousands of Oregonians who pitch in a little bit every month from their janitor or security guard or teacher paycheck.
Thank you. Amy, same question.
I absolutely support the ballot measure that's going to allow us to establish campaign contribution limits. I also absolutely think we should have campaign contribution limits. And I'm really disappointed that the legislature did not have a companion bill that actually established limits as part of this session. We should be voting on both. Last year, the Oregonian had a great article on this, talking about dark money in campaigns and the negative impact it's having. And Oregon's one of the few states where there's sky's the limit in statewide offices. That's inappropriate. I'm the only candidate in this race who has never taken corporate funds in my 9 years of elected office and 4 races that I've run. And that's something that I've either accepted or voluntarily opted in to such limits. That's important because campaign contributions do buy influence. People can deny it all they want, but the fact of the matter is it does. And it also empowers those corporations giving you money. So, for example, here in Oregon, our state is the second hardest hit in the nation on the opioid crisis. It's been devastating for so many Oregonians. Yet it's typical in the legislature, apparently. And again, I'm the only one in this race who has never taken corporate money from opioid manufacturers. I think that's shameful given the impact that opioids have had on our state. I think there's a line that needs to be drawn. There's integrity and ethics that need to be around our campaign contribution limits. And then part of getting the word out as a candidate, you have to raise more money from more people. And that's the challenge. It's not, when I ran in 2018, we raised 1.3 million, more than had ever been raised in 20 years against one of the most powerful congressmen in the Congress. And we did that with over 7,000 contributions. So it's smaller donors, people who opt in and want to see you in that role. You don't need big dollar money to do that. You need to rely on individuals to do that. That's what I've always done in the past. And that corporate money influence is real, and people can deny it all they want. But I think that's the cornerstone of it. We need to establish limits here in Oregon, and then people should be required to opt in. And I would enforce that as Secretary of State.
Thank you, Jamie. Shifting gears on our next question, one of the critical functions of the Secretary of State, and it's unique to Oregon, is the Audits Division. How will you approach, and Jamie, you'll have the opportunity to respond first, how will you approach selecting those agencies or functions in need of an audit? How will you prioritize audits and responses?
Well, first of all, this is one of the very exciting aspects of the role. And I've been on audit committees. I've served, I've been audited from frontline staff in management in multiple capacities. And audits are essentially a way to make government better. So, the approach I would use is to make sure we're not just looking at financial audits, but performance audits. Is money being spent as intended? Equity audits, making sure we're addressing those equity discrepancies that we know exist. Sustainability audits, and that's both environmental sustainability and financial sustainability to make sure the long-term investment of our public resources are serving. Information security, health and safety audits. After we get through this pandemic, we're going to need to do an audit of the process, our response to it, to make sure we figure out what we did well and what we can do better next time. My training in audits was through the Baldrige model, where you look at the strengths and opportunities of an organization. With regard to agencies, it's a partnership of bringing many voices around the table and finding what the issues and challenges are. So some of the places where we've seen financial challenges in the past, more recently, is the Forestry Department. There was some issues around excessive resources for wildfires, but there's also, that's an area to look. The Oregon Health Authority, and again, in the response to COVID-19. And education, of course, the Student Success Act, looking at that and auditing. As an ESD board member, I'm in the process of implementing that with my colleagues, making sure we audit that, but also the fact that almost a quarter of our educators are leaving on an annual basis. That's a crisis level within our state, and we need to figure out, look at issues of class size, and address these issues that are not being addressed in the legislature. Travel Oregon with the spiking of the payroll, that's another area. And then forensics, making sure that there's a solid line between our public safety officers who collect information and forensics to make sure we're not putting people in prison without the evidence, and making sure that evidence is correct.
Thank you, Jamie. Mark, same question. How will you approach selecting those agencies or functions in need of an audit? And how will you prioritize audits and responses?
I'll be involved in the audits division every day. I'll play a hands-on role on selecting the government areas that should be investigated or audited to protect tax dollars. My criteria: eliminating waste, ensuring laws are followed as intended, protecting children in foster care, ensuring state agencies minimize their carbon footprint, and making sure that agencies and their contractors comply with ethics and diversity standards. And once an audit is away, I'll get out of the way and let the professionals complete their work wherever it goes, whatever the findings, that will be made public.
Mike, we've lost Mark here, so let me come back to you for a quick second and see if we can get him back here. Hold on. So I'm gonna see what I can do.
We are having some challenges right now with Mark's speed, so we will move on to Shemia's response while we try and address Mark's technical challenges there. But Shemia, again, same question: how will you approach selecting those agencies or functions in need of an audit, and how will you prioritize audits and responses?
Sure. I think when a lot of folks hear about audits, they think that might be a good place to go grab a snack or a cup of coffee, because a lot of people don't understand it. But audits are really about protecting Oregonians' investment in taking care of each other in the Oregon way. And kind of as a very low level example, my first term in the Oregon House, I joined the Oregon House, and a month later, a little 5-year-old girl was killed because she didn't have a safe place to cross the street in East Portland, right in my neighborhood. And so I went to work with the city of Portland. The legislature delivered a historic investment in sidewalks in East Portland in very, very underserved communities. And a veteran lawmaker told me, watch those dollars, watch that money. And so I did over the course of the next couple of years, that regular update. And ODOT finished the project under budget and on time. So first off, great job, ODOT, right? Audits don't have to be used just to show what's not working, but also to show what's working, because the public servants that get so much criticism when something is not working don't often get the praise they deserve when things are working. So great job, ODOT. But we were then able to redirect the under budget part to buy a bunch of rapid flashing crosswalks in East Portland to make sure to actually fulfill that same purpose of making kids in East Portland have a safe place to cross the street, a safe way to walk to school. And so our audits really can be about lifting up the story to the folks doing work and doing it well, and then also saying what other tools do they need to do this well. It doesn't have to be about beating public workers over the head and finding and catching people messing up. And so one thing that I think is really important, I'm proud to be endorsed by the Oregon League of Conservation Voters. And one of the reasons is because I propose that in every audit, not just environmental and sustainability audits, but in every audit that we add to the methodology how to mitigate the impacts of climate change. Because whether you're looking at contract procurement or any other type of audit, if you actually look at, oh, well, there's actually a climate change element here. It may cost less dollars to do it this one way, or it may have been cheaper when they did it this way this time. But if it actually increases our carbon footprint, that's also a cost that needs to be evaluated. And so adding in the mitigation and the climate change impacts in every single audit as as a part of the methodology, and also adding equity, because equity isn't just about when we're looking at equity, but also to make sure that in everything that we do, even when it's not obvious, that we're not serving our vulnerable communities.
Great, thank you, Shemia. Let's give Mark an opportunity. Hopefully the digital world is cooperating, right? So Mark, an opportunity again to respond. How will you approach selecting those agencies or functions in need of an audit, and how will you prioritize the audits and the responses?
I am not sure that Mark is got a good solid connection. Hey, Mark, if you could, Mark, if you can hear me, I'm going to come here. Hey, Mark, if you can hear me, can you leave the room and join it again? I think we've got some issues on your end. So if you could go ahead and leave the room and come back, and I'll get you queued up basically to answer that question again. So hold on. Let's let Mark clear out here. And then, unfortunately, a brave new world here. Hi, all.
This is usually just a challenge for rural areas.
Yeah, well,
with
this
limited
is
internet connections.
so.
In Beaverton, so I don't know what the excuse is.
So for all of you who've not joined us, I'm Matt Hand. I'm the technical director of this, and you can see my studio right now. We've got a little Mike, a little Jamie, and
tech audit happening right now. I was going to say something before Matt jumped in, because I'm like, am I the only one getting some weird feedback?
Yeah, no, we're gonna let Mark, just re-sign in here. He's reconnecting, so let's pin him. Let's see if we're back. Hey, Mark, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you much better. It looks like we actually have a good solid connection with you now, I think. I hope so, at least. Should we try this again here, Mark?
Again.
Oh, shoot. Are you serious? You're breaking in and out, Mark.
Okay.
Hey, Mark, can you close out do you have other things open on your computer? Sometimes that if you close everything else out and then also don't use your mouse, that's what I've seen in our 2-week experience with some of that. That might help as well.
Okay. Give me a second.
Yeah, not a problem. No. The brave new world.
No, we'll get.
Can me close all my games.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all that. No more Minecraft. No more. Yeah, exactly.
That's what I was doing when I was listening to you. No.
Yeah, I know. We had you good for a long time. My guess is that it's 6:30 and everybody's
People
gaming.
are jumping on.
Yeah.
Hey, I've been through a lot of these conversations with Mark. I can tell you he's going to talk about Student Success Act because he played a major role in that in the state legislature, and that's something. So I'm queuing you up, Mark.
Let's see if we can get Mark back here, because we don't have a contingency for. We should have figured that one out.
No,
Is there not a call?
Well, there is. I was just going to say, hey, Mark, if you could call in, that would probably be good. There's a. Let's see. How can I get you the phone number? Because that was not probably on the invite that you got. All right. Welcome to the brave new world.
Thanks, Rona.
So what this is, it's an exercise in humility. So anyone who struggles with their Zoom or their live stream, or if something falls down, you can know that, hey, it happens to everyone.
Yeah. That's why I had to start doing this from my bedroom because that's the only place I have the hardware. When we were on that call with Secretary Clarno the other day, Jamie, I kept breaking up because I was trying to be on a better background out in my family room. But I've now been doing these Zoom calls from my bedroom, and I was horrified. I forget, a couple nights ago, I was kicking off my phone bankers, and I got off the call to realize my dog was on my bed chewing on my underwear.
Awkward.
And I was like,
My dog pops up over my shoulder sometimes, but actually got the door closed now.
Yeah, no, yeah, my dog, if the door closed, he'd scratch at it the whole time. But it was like absolutely, I mean, I don't think other people knew, but it was one of those things where I was like, oh, this is a new level of vulnerability for people to be like, you don't even know what's happening behind you.
We're all more real now.
Yes. Now everyone sees, even folks running for office, we're all very real people with very real human challenges.
Oh, I don't know what you guys are talking about. Everything works fine in my world all the time.
And just to let anyone who's watching know, you can hear an audio replay of this in Central Oregon and beyond on 88.9 KPOV noon tomorrow on Thursday.
Hold
How are
on.
we doing?
We're gonna. Hey, Mark, I'm gonna send you actually Jerry's gonna send you a phone call in number that should allow you to at least call in, and we won't have the breakup. I would say just stay on video because it'll sync okay with both. But let me grab this phone number for you, and
You might want to give the phone number offline because of
yeah,
some of the
no, it's
stories.
gonna yes, it is going to go to him directly.
You guys might get a whole
100,000 Oregonians.
I know exactly.
Yeah.
League of Women Voters starts a brand new forum.
Okay, so you're going to send a phone
Yeah, I am going to.
with a text?
Yeah, Jerry's going to send it to you.
Okay.
I had to redo something here, so. And Mark, it's just going to come straight over that you should be able to tap on it, and you should be able to just dial directly from that. Thank you all.
And to just let viewers, listeners know, we have 3 additional forms that will be taken next Monday. We have the 2nd Congressional District with the Democratic candidates. And on next Wednesday, the 22nd, we'll have the Republican candidate for the 2nd Congressional District. And then finally, on Monday, April 29th, we will have the Deschutes County Commissioners, the Democrat candidates. And that will all be here on the YouTube channel for the League of Women Voters and the City Club.
Yeah, we're still waiting for Mark here to.
If people are interested, we're also doing ongoing town halls with candidates around the state. And I believe it's April 18th that we're going to be doing a Central Oregon one with a lot of different candidates who are running for different offices here in Deschutes County here in Central Oregon.
And Jamie, that'll be an online event?
It's people can either go on through Zoom or live stream. We also put on YouTube afterwards. And we're doing a whole series on Oregon Voices Roundtable where we're making sure that voices can be heard and using the platform of our campaign to make sure people can talk about issues specific to their region or their area or their respective communities, or issues on everything from economic development to issues impacting the Latinx community statewide, not just in one area or another. So we've got a lot of those going on as well.
So Matt, are we fairly close?
I think so. I'll check in with Jerry here. I had texted her the phone number, so hopefully that got to Mark here.
Good. Means we're getting closer. And I want to thank everyone for their patience. Thanks so much for tuning in and being part of this new democratic process. It's a whole lot more fun when we can all gather in a room, but this is our virtual rooms, and we will work through the technology and be back with Mark's response to that question in just a few moments.
Well, just while we're waiting for him to jump in, and Mark mentioned this, and I thought the point was really well taken. We're looking at the distance learning that's going on right now. We're seeing problems like this with access to access to equipment, but also access to the internet. And I appreciate Mark mentioning it. I know his wife is an educator, and there's challenges they've got in the metro area, but here in Jefferson County, in our ESD, especially for our lower income communities, the tribal communities, the Latinx community, and also folks in our Caucasian community who don't have some of the resources or can't afford broadband access. This really speaks to making sure people have access to the information highway, and it's a whole other policy issue that I'm sure the three of us would all agree needs to move forward, and we need to do a better job so that we can serve our communities.
Oh, looks like he might be dialing in here, or just about. Thank you all again for your patience as we endeavor to make this happen. Oh, yep.
And we're getting our behind-the-scenes documentary live now.
Hey, Mike, how's it going? Yeah.
I could fill, but it's usually not necessarily politically related.
I know. It's. I was going to say, do you want to do your oldies show on air right now? You could. Can you grab your music and.
I can always. I have stories. Okay, I'll share a quick one. Just
okay.
Because,
well, is it politics related?
No.
Okay.
It's strictly entertainment related, but everybody's heard the song "Sugar Sugar" by the Archies, which is a fictitious group that basically featured studio musicians from LA, and then Ron Dante on male lead vocals and Tony Wine on female lead vocals. Well, the guitar that you hear in Sugar Sugar, Andy Kim was one of the co-producers along with Jeff Barry, and the guitarist couldn't get it right. So Andy Kim says, well, let me show you how I want it to sound. So Andy Kim looked around and he couldn't find his pick. So what he did is he grabbed a matchbook cover and played the guitar with a matchbook cover. And you actually hear on the song Sugar Sugar is Andy Kim playing the guitar with a matchbook cover rather than a pick. And thus it gave it its unique sound.
Oh, very cool.
I appreciate that. I am a huge Trivial Pursuit fan. And so that's the kind of factoid that in my head, I'm like, that will definitely be a Trivial Pursuit question someday. That's going to get me probably, I bet that would be a pink. No,
a pink pie.
Say, like, well, that's
yeah, that could be a pink pie.
Maybe it'd be like the literary, maybe like the purple. So that will either give me a pink or a purple pie. So I appreciate that very much because that's definitely a Trivial Pursuit type question.
I'm a fountain of useless information. I have a trivial database of about 2,300 questions that I developed covering history, entertainment, sports, politics, you name it. I've got it. Like another interesting one. This is a political one, but there's only been one president who was not nominated by his party for re-election. That's always a great trivia question. It's a good bar question too.
Gerald Ford?
What's that?
Is that Gerald Ford?
But he wanted to run, but he was not nominated by his party to run again. There's only been one sitting president that had that happen to. Elected sitting president, I should qualify it.
Oh, elected, okay.
Elected president who was not nominated by his party for a second term. This one could get you a piece of the pie in Trivial Pursuit.
I was going to say, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
And I'll give the answer in just a moment. As soon as Matt says we're going to go back, I can.
Yeah.
The suspense. You got me.
I just sent Mark an email direct, so we'll see here in a second if he gets it.
Well, if we've got folks on, we could also be making plug for people getting their census information back. You can go to my2020census.gov. That's critically important. We were talking about redistricting earlier. It's making sure that everyone counts, making sure folks know that they should check their voter registration at sos.oregon.gov by April 28th. What other little PSAs can we throw in here?
That was an easy one to remember for folks. OregonVotes.org.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much, if people are like in our military or working overseas or something like that, there's just so much more information. So I usually just direct people to the sos.oregon.gov because it's got all that other, it's got a font of info on there. Let me see what else. We have closed primaries, so you need to be registered to vote in this race. You need to be registered as a Democrat. Or if you're voting as a Republican and want to vote for the folks who are on the last forum, then you need to be registered as a Republican.
Thank you. That's actually good information. I completed my census upon receipt. And I was actually surprised that it was as brief as it was. I thought historically they were involved in what I had experienced in this.
The long and the short, yeah.
Hey,
Maybe the long
Hey,
form.
this is Mark Hass's.
hey, there's Mark.
Hey, Mark.
Okay,
Beautiful.
good. Okay, you can hear us, Mark?
I can hear you fine.
Okay,
yeah.
great. Yeah, we have you all good. So yes, now we're good.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, if you leave your video and just will use your audio from your phone, sounds great. So perfect. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
All right, so let me give the answer to the trivia question, and then I'll give it to Mark for the with regard to now the only elected president who was not nominated by his party for a second term was Franklin Pierce.
Oh.
You can use
Okay.
that as you wish at bar trivia, and it will guarantee to get you probably whatever you want as far as beverages go. But Mark, back to the question with regard to audit. Critical function of the Secretary of State's office. How will you approach selecting those agencies or functions in need of an audit, and how will you prioritize audits and responses?
Okay, well, start over with this question. I appreciate you dealing with the technical issues there. I would be a hands-on person in the audits division. I will be there every day. And I believe in this process because this is the number one function in the Constitution to protect taxpayers' money. And so I have some criteria on how I would do that. Number one, you ensure the tax dollars are protected. Number two, I would set up a protocol to make sure that the carbon footprint of the agency that's being audited is minimized. Number three, I would make sure that when these audits are done, when they are selected, I step back and let the professionals have their way to whatever the conclusions say, whether it's embarrassing or not. That is the conclusion, and that will be communicated by my office. The very first audit that I would order would be on the student success law. It was a huge law that we passed in 2019, and it was necessarily complex. I want to make sure that all of the money, more than $1 billion a year, goes to schools, goes to classrooms, doesn't get hijacked by the bureaucracy, doesn't get hijacked by legislators. And the other part of that equation is the tax component. I want to make sure that the tax is paid, it's administered fairly, and everybody's paying it as intended. So that's a lot of work, but I think that's the most important law that the state has passed in years. And so that's why I want to make that my first audit.
Great. Thank you, Mark, and glad to have you back on board. Shifting gears a little bit, and Shemia, you'll have the opportunity to answer this next question first. And this relates to one of the roles in the Secretary of State's office. How will you balance the need to protect our natural heritage with the need to provide resources for the Common School Fund on the State Land Board?
So this question kind of naturally alludes to the issue over the Elliott State Forest, which obviously is a pristine piece of Oregon that's in the Common School Fund, but obviously is costing the Common School Fund money. And constitutionally, the State Land Board has a fiduciary responsibility. The Common School Fund is supposed to provide resources to schools, not cost money. And so I support the process of decoupling the Elliott Forest from the Common School Fund to make sure that it's not continuing to pull resources from the Common School Fund. I would never sell the Elliott State Forest to loggers like Lone Rock Timber, which is one of the logging companies that attempted to buy the Elliott Forest in the recent past. So I would never, and I'm proud to be endorsed by the Oregon League of Conservation Voters because of the positions that I've taken around this. And so there's talk about it being a research forest for Oregon State University, which I think I could support as long as there are strong sideboards that we don't just then have Oregon State University then do things with it that we otherwise would not have allowed because of our conservation values in Oregon. But I think the biggest thing is to decouple the Elliott State Forest from the Common School Fund, and so it does not continue to pull resources from the Common School Fund. So the Common School Fund can fulfill its fiduciary and constitutional responsibility to provide millions of dollars in research to our state schools.
Great, thank you. And Jamie, same question. How do we balance the need to protect our natural heritage with the need to provide resources for the Common School Fund on the State Land Board?
So the State Land Board is a critically important role, and we don't typically have someone in that role, in that capacity, of the three, the Secretary of State, the Governor, and the State Treasurer, who have a natural resource background. I'm a natural resource attorney. I worked as an engineer and as an environmental planner for a regional water agency that served over 2 million people. My law degree focused on natural resource, water law, and Indian law. And I was appointed by the governor to serve on OWEB, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. So overall, I think we need a proactive, sustainable policy for all decisions made by the land use, the State Land Board. Specific to Elliott Forest, what we need to do is make sure that we are recognizing multiple values of our forests, of our natural resources. So it's not simply how many, how much wood we can cut out of our forests, but also recognizing our natural resources, our public lands can be carbon sinks. There's tourist values. There's multiple values to our natural resources, and making sure all those are recognized. In some cases, need to quantify them so that we can strike that balance between making sure that we're recognizing, quantifying the value, the different values that are provided. With regard to the public lands, I believe public lands belong to the public and needs to stay in public hands. I also a key aspect that we need to focus on with regard to the Elliott State Forest is to make sure that we have multiple voices at the table. This is leadership I provide on OWEB on a regular basis, making sure our tribal communities their voices are heard, making sure that the multiple values are recognized. So what's been proposed, and I think we need to take a step back from where we are with the Elliott State Forest. It's looking at just having the forestry division at Oregon State University oversee that. I think that's not appropriate. I think it should be looking at multiple different owners and multiple different organizations as part of that management process. So I think we need to revisit that process and bring more voice to the table, so we're recognizing more of the value and greater values for our natural resources.
Great, thank you, Jamie. And Mark, same question with regard to balancing natural heritage with the Common School Fund on the State Land Board.
I've worked with lots of endowments and foundations, been employed by foundations, and the real goal is to maximize your assets and let those assets build so you can complete your mission. And the Common School Board's mission is to throw money off for Oregon schools. I think they threw off $70 million last year. The problem is this Common School Fund, unlike most foundations, has lots of illiquid assets like the Elliott, like common lands. If it was just an equity stock, they could say, let's sell our shares in IBM and dump them because they're not doing well, and let's invest in Nike. But it's not that easy when you have forests and common lands. And that's where the land board always gets into a problem. The Elliott State Forest was this herky-jerky process that was controversial. First we'd sell it, but not sell it, and then sell half of it. And eventually we ended up having the state buy it from itself. And I don't think that was an elegant process. But what's missing in all of this is a set of guidelines. The statute says highest permanent use. So what is that when it comes to land? Is it recreation on the Elliott? Is it forest management? Is it ecology? What are those? And what's missing is a process to say, here's our North Star. We want our lands managed for recreation only, or only to preserve the environment, or to be an ecosystem for salmon. And I would engage in an entire public process. So this would be a guidance, so you would know what to do. There was a land parcel sold off by the state land a couple of months ago over in Bend. It was about 600 acres, and they sold it to developers who were expanding in Bend. And it was not controversial. So these are case-by-case situations, and there is no guidance to help the land board decide what to do or what makes the most sense or what Oregonians want. So I would engage in that process as one of the land board members.
Great, thanks, Mark. We've got time for a few more questions, and this one, Mark, you will have the opportunity to respond first. It's ripped out of the headlines. Small businesses are among the hardest hit segments of the economy at this time in dealing with the coronavirus. As Secretary of State, what measures do you propose to help small businesses recover?
Well, I was just doing a video with of the Noble Rot restaurant and wine bar in Portland. Two women who have owned that restaurant for 20 years. They built it up to a very popular spot. And within a month, all of their life savings and investment went right down the drain. And they need to start over. And they need to get back on their feet, get their employees back on their feet, pay health insurance, and all of those things. This is what we did in 2010 and 2011. And the first thing that we decided to do was, however bad the economy is, we're not going to be able to tax our way to prosperity. So you don't raise taxes on small business. You don't raise taxes on small business. And I think that should be a mantra. That's what helped us get through 2010 to 2017. And actually, small businesses started to flourish. The economy was raging a month ago. And so I think that is the kind of responsible management that they need. We have a small business office in the Secretary of State's office that is just incredible. It's overloaded now with help. And I think what we will do is build on that as Secretary of State. And in the meantime, the federal stimulus packages are just now flowing into Oregon. And right now, we don't have the federal guidance on how that money will help small business, big business, people, hospitals, and all of that. But that should be known within the next week or two. And once we figure out where the gaps are, that will allow us to get together in a special session of the legislature and fill some of those gaps. But I've been talking to them a lot, and they are hurting. They are really hurting, and especially their employees. And so my intent is to work closely with them as Secretary of State.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Shemia, same question. How do you propose to help small businesses recover in this current economic state?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Mark. He mentioned the Office of Small Business Assistance, the small business advocate within the Secretary of State's office, and that they're just incredible. And I agree. I was the chief co-sponsor of the bill, my very first session, that created that advocate within the Secretary of State's office, the Office of Small Business Assistance. And they are nationally not only nationally recognized, but internationally recognized as an incredible model, basically a one-stop shop for small businesses who have questions on licensing, some letter they get. And in this case, obviously, as Senator Hass, I think, correctly alluded to, they're just overwhelmed with people seeking help for these federal grants that are supposed to be coming down for small businesses. They look like loans, but if they meet certain criteria, they can become grants. And yet I was just talking to a small business owner in my district just 2 days ago, and they're like, yeah, if we could qualify, if we can actually get one of these, but they're just backed up the process. We've been talking with the credit unions about how the process is actually playing itself out, and it's incredibly confusing. And so the small business advocate is incredibly important right now, but needs to be doing more in this time, because 95% of businesses in Oregon are small businesses. We are not a big business state. We have a couple, of course, of large corporations that are notable, but really the lifeblood of Oregon business is small business. And we need to do a lot to make sure that small business, even as we come back in our recovery and our small businesses come back, that we're inclusive. And one major equity change that we have to make is the fact that the corporate forms in the Secretary of State's office, which is where somebody with an idea, any kind of, whether they want to create a nonprofit or a benefit corporation or any other the kind of business entities in Oregon, they just go on in a simple process and they can actually open that business right there on the Secretary of State's website. The problem is those forms are only in English. So as we look to a small business recovery, we need to make sure that we're, again, looking at that through an equity lens to make sure that as we recover, we're not only recovering for a certain communities, but they're recovering for everybody. And there are lots of folks who don't speak English as a first language or don't speak English at all, who are incredible entrepreneurs with wonderful ideas. And so one significant change we can make in the Secretary of State's office is actually make sure that those corporate forms to take that first step to set up your own small business are not only in English.
Great, thank you. And Jamie, same question, measures that you would propose to help small businesses recover in this economic situation?
Well, really appreciate this question because, the point's well taken. Our small businesses are the economic engine for our state, and this is a nonpartisan issue. We need to create stability now the best we can. And then once we're through COVID-19 to rebuild and really deal with the tremendous impact that our small businesses are experiencing. So we actually, we're being proactive right now. We've got information available on our website. We have been pushing things out through social media to have, make sure people have access to additional information, because there's stuff happening through the Secretary of State's website, the Secretary of State's office. There's also a lot of regional things going on, a lot of other resources and information. So we've been working to push that out and make sure folks on the regional level have a sense of what's available. We're also going to be covering this in our Oregon Voices roundtables that we have. It's one of the topics is small business. Once we get through the pandemic that we're in now, we then kick into better outreach, better support. One of the things I've been talking about for a long time is working in partnerships with community colleges, with VOTEC programs in high schools to help build up the entrepreneurship. And this is especially important for rural communities. So in urban and rural communities, building up that economic muscle. And also supporting organizations like benefit corporations, B Corps, those organizations that use a triple bottom line to benefit not just their own wallet, but also they look at their impact on the community and then also on the environment. So yes, accessibility is critically important, but not everyone, as we were saying earlier, has access to the web. So yes, available in many languages, but also working with community-based organizations. This is work I've done in the past, building up community organizations who are more trusted by their respective communities. This is especially true for refugee and immigrant communities. So working with those community-based organizations, so things are available in language and are also culturally appropriate. And for folks who don't have access to the internet, they can still get access to that information.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. Time for two more questions before we go to closing statements. Find this one rather intriguing. And Jamie, you'll have the opportunity to respond first. What will you do to bridge the West, defined in the question is urban of the Cascades, and East, rural of the Cascades divide?
Well, this is near and dear to my heart because my wife and I live in Central Oregon. I finished high school in Southern Oregon. I actually spent my first year of college up in Portland at Lewis and Clark. But we see this divide throughout our state. And a lot of people assume it's a political divide. There's that aspect, but it's more than that. It's also, we have progressives in rural areas, and we've got conservatives in urban areas as well. So it's really the work we did in 2018, traveling in 2/3 of the state geographically, 20 of the 36 counties. It's showing up, it's listening, it's showing respect to folks and bringing people together around ideas. We've got so much divisiveness we've seen on the national level, and then we've seen also in our legislature last 2 years, our last couple sessions where people are walking out. Oregonians are sick of that and want to find ways to work together. And we've got models of partnership throughout our state. So it's building on those partnership models, bringing people together around the ideas and issues that we can focus on. I used to say a lot that we, regardless of party affiliation, we all care about our communities, we all care about our families. And so there's a lot of room to develop common ground. A key example, we look at climate change. The legislature keeps failing in this area and failing to pass legislation. Well, climate impacts are impacting our rural areas and our ag economy more than anyone. But the failure to be able to work together and bring people together, and we've done that. It's partially that decorum, and it's taking politics, it's focusing on people, not the politics. And that's one of the things that I bring a unique aspect to this role, and also a way I'll be able to lead and bring Oregonians together.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. Mark, same question. How would you bridge the west of the Cascades and the east of the Cascades divide?
Well, when I first went to the legislature, I was a Democrat, and Republicans controlled government. They controlled both chambers of the legislature. And I quickly learned that if I was going to be successful as a minority party, I would have to build relationships and make friends with some of these Republicans. And I was lucky. I had were Republicans, and we worked together, and I helped them with their bills. They helped me with mine, and I got some bills passed and some new laws passed as a freshman. And I quickly learned that if you respect others, they'll respect you. I just kept that MO as I moved to the Senate and got to the majority and chaired committees in that, and that's still true today. And so I have a great relationship with most of the Republicans in the legislature. We work together, and the Oregon Promise, 28-1. Republicans told me that they, needed help for their young people. They needed opportunities for their young people too through community college. I think there are more shared values in urban and rural areas than there are values that drive us apart. I really do. And I think my tenure in the legislature has been marked by working together on those things that we both care about and how to do it in a way where there's common ground, where we can both call it a win. And that's been the hallmark of my record and my service in the legislature.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And Shemia, same question. How would you bridge the west of the Cascades and the east of the Cascades divide?
Well, it starts by the fact that I was raised by a Republican father east of the Cascades. I grew up in Dufur and the Dalles. When I went to law school in the Willamette Valley at Lewis and Clark, my brothers continued east and now live in Stanfield and Pendleton. And when I sit down with my brothers at at Thanksgiving dinner, or the 6, 7, 8, 9 times a year that I get out there for things with my nieces and nephews, while party identification is an obvious thing to divide people, the reality is we agree on so much. And we see this in the legislature, that the bills that look partisan, if you actually look at who supports them, as opposed to the politicians in Salem who support them, they're supported overwhelmingly by Oregonians. Things like statewide paid sick leave, background checks on gun sales. My brother is a military veteran, diesel mechanic at the Hermiston FedEx out there. And he's like, of course, background checks on gun sales. I'm a dad. That makes sense. I want my family to be safe. Of course, safe storage on guns. I would never have guns in my house with having them locked up. And so I think that too often we equate partisan rancor with what happens because the Republicans in Salem refuse to actually support legislation actually support and that benefit them. Time and time again in Salem, we were asked to pare back on legislation, statewide rent or sick leave, and only have it applied to certain metro counties. And we resisted that because whether you're a Walmart worker in Hermiston or working at a bakery in Klamath Falls or a gas station in Central Oregon, you deserve to be able to take care of a family member or yourself when you're sick, regardless of whether and not have to lose pay, and regardless of where you work in this state. And so I think that part of it is to actually look past the partisan labels and actually look to the ideas, because there is so much that unites Oregonians. And I think another key that I always want to make sure that we address when we talk about urban and rural is that rural does not mean white Oregonians. There's an incredibly diverse population from the tribes to Latinx community. In the Dalles, where I grew up, there's a large Samoan community. And so we have to make sure to not allow urban versus rural to have racial and racist undertones, as it often does, because there's a lot of folks who use it in that way. And so I'm proud to be endorsed by the Cocoon Latinx Farm Workers Union in our state. And they're one of the most vibrant voices out in all of rural Oregon.
Great. Thank you, Shemia. And final question before we get to opening statements, and it was brought up during the discussion here. We're conducting this in a virtual world. Most Oregonians are currently working from home. As Secretary of State, and Shemia, you'll have the first opportunity to respond to this, how will you ensure that all Oregonians have access to high-speed broadband internet to ensure that they can participate in what is emerging as the new economy?
Well, this is a major equity issue. It's already been alluded to. It's been shown, although I'm sure that, broadband is not an issue out in where Mark is in Washington County, but it obviously is an example of, he talked about his son and, getting a Chromebook. This is a major equity issue across Oregon, not only for rural communities, but also for, metro folks who maybe only can go to a library to actually get access to the internet, and yet libraries are closed right now. So this is a major issue. And this is one of the places where the audits function can actually bring up, and if you have an equity piece in all of your audits, not just equity audits, but part of the methodology to show the places in which this impacts schools, it impacts performance, it impacts the ability of communities to engage with their government when they don't have the access to, and when they don't have access to broadband and the tools that they need to engage. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart. Since I've been a legislator, my goal has been to break down barriers and allow people to participate. I did my first teletown hall back in 2014 or 2015, and a woman commented, I never get to come to this stuff because I can't go to the library at 10 a.m. on a Saturday because I have 3 kids, but I'm participating in your town hall from the bleachers at my daughter's volleyball game. In 2019, I started a podcast with a colleague in Southern Oregon, and one of the most downloaded episodes was called How a Bill Becomes Law in Oregon with my kindergartner. And so I think that we got to make sure that we use all the tools that we have to break down barriers, to make government accessible, but we have to make sure everybody has those tools, or it continues to leave people further and further behind.
Great. Thank you, Shemia. I think I might have seen that one on Schoolhouse Rock before.
Yes.
Jamie, same question with regard to ensuring that all Oregonians have access to high-speed broadband internet given our current economic and work situations.
Well, rural Oregon has been talking about this for years, and there's some steps at the federal level, but it's an issue of resources. And this is where the legislature, who allocates resources for our state, needs to step up and show leadership. And we just have had a lack of that. We haven't had a champion for rural communities and for disadvantaged communities who don't have access to these resources in the legislature, and that's why we don't have it right now. So it is frustrating. But COVID-19 and distance learning and the things that are making it so clear for us that there is this huge gap. And so, in Jefferson County, where I serve on the Education Service District Board, we're seeing this with our kids right now, especially on the Warm Springs tribe, and especially in our lower income communities. That includes the Latinx community, which is a third of the kids in our community. So we're seeing these challenges. Again, we've been talking about this for years in rural Oregon, but that's one of the frustrations that we're having of not being heard, and so many voices not being heard in the Capitol. I interviewed just yesterday a council member, a rural Democrat council member from Hermiston, who's a member of a Latinx organization there, and he was just saying, and it's on our podcast, it's available to everyone to see. He was talking about his frustration of not being heard and not having rural issues and rural Latinx issues not heard and not addressed in the legislature. So we need a champion of that. We also need to work more in partnership. That we are now in the information age, and we wouldn't think twice about blocking people from access to our roads, our public roads, where we need public access to information. And that's something that we know it's a huge problem. We can identify and daylight it more through the audit process. And just that there seems to be some misunderstanding about audits. Of course, you incorporate these different aspects that you talk about. You look at the financial aspects you do an audit. You look at performance. Is it being spent as intended? Sustainability and equity, it's part of audit. So developing not just the better understanding amongst folks who are talking about it, but a better understanding of the public amongst the potential for audits to daylight some of those issues, the ways we can do it. But ultimately, this is a resource issue. The school districts and ESDs like the one in Jefferson County, the one I serve on, we're desperate for help and support from Salem. And we're just, from the legislature, we're just looking for that champion to step up and make it a reality.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. And Mark, same question with regard to broadband access in the state of Oregon.
This is a problem that I've been working on for a long time, but one that I think we have to acknowledge a lot of progress has been made. 20 years ago, there was no wireless in rural Oregon. It just there wasn't. And if you saw a map of Oregon over the last 20 years, you would see it start filling up with color where there is broadband and wireless capability almost everywhere. But at some point, it does become an issue of not just resources, but infrastructure. And these large communication companies and cable companies and the like are reluctant to deliver these services without getting paid without the customer base to make it worthwhile. So as Senate Revenue Chair, what we did in 2015 was create incentives in Senate Bill 611. It was a central assessment bill so that it would make them whole. And that made a world of difference in rural Oregon. And so we have been making progress. And I dismiss the notion that we're not doing anything in rural Oregon or it's impossible to get online in rural Oregon. We have work to do, and it is a resource issue. I think it's a tax issue as well, but it's really an infrastructure issue. And I think there's a confluence there where we can continue to make progress.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you to all three of you, Jamie, Shemia, and Mark, for answering the questions. Now we will take closing statements. And Mark, we will begin with you, your closing statement on why you should be the Democratic nominee for Secretary of State.
Thank you. And thanks for hosting this. My hat's off to the League of Women Voters for continually putting on these great public affairs programs. I think that these tough times call for tough people, people who have been tested. We're talking about leading a state agency that's created in the Constitution to oversee the most important functions of our state government: elections, accountability, redistricting. These responsibilities were given to this office by Oregon pioneers when they established a new government to serve the settlers of Oregon. And that's important to me, and I do not take these duties lightly. Oregonians want someone who knows what they're doing. They want someone familiar with the tools and the authority of this office, especially at a time like this. I have been able to get big things done in Oregon. I did it through hard work and respect. I found people at the Capitol will respect you when you respect them. I mentioned the Oregon Promise passed 28-1. I work with Republicans, I work with business people, I work with community leaders, labor leaders, and community college to get that bill passed. We will continue to have to work together in the coming months and years. We will need to rebuild our economy and get people back to work. I've seen what happens when good things work, when people work together, good things happen. Just in my neighborhood over the last few weeks, probably yours as well, delivering prescriptions to people who can't get out, donating food and money. A young girl on my street has volunteered taking dogs out for a walk. And nobody is asking if anybody is a Democrat or Republican. There's no time in the next couple of years for partisan nonsense during this crisis. This is too important. Quite literally, lives are at stake. So I hope you agree with me that we need people we know, people we can trust. My record is solid, and I'm proud of my accomplishments at the Capitol. I have the independence to do this job, and I believe I have the integrity to do it right.
Thank you, Mark. And Shemia, your closing statement.
Thank you. And I imagine a lot of people watching this right now are saying, man, there's 3 Democrats who agree with each other on a lot of stuff, and I like all 3 of them. And I think that's a true conundrum. I like both of my colleagues very much in this race. I think in this race, deciding between the 3 of us, for me, it's going to come down to, I'm very proud of the endorsements that I have in this race, because all of the organizations that are endorsing me had a chance to also talk to all 3 of us and also had that same feeling of like, man, these are 3 Democrats who we like. But I have built an incredibly strong coalition in this race that is racially diverse, statewide, and geographically diverse, from Planned Parenthood to the Oregon State Firefighters, Oregon League of Conservation Voters, and a strong coalition of Oregon labor unions are all supporting me in this race, because they know that I have a track record of standing up for what's right, to standing up for regular, everyday Oregonians, even when it has meant standing up against my own party, and even when it has meant standing up against my personal friends. I think the Bend Bulletin said it best in their strong endorsement of me last week. They said, we looked at all 3 candidates. They all kind of agree on basic issues, but we're endorsing Shemia Fagan because, quote, she has a track record of being straight with Oregonians when things are not working as they should. And they went into examples of where I've shown independence, even from my own Democratic leadership in the state Senate and the state House. So I'm asking Oregonians to also trust that track record. And to all of you watching here and who will watch when it's not live and later, I'm asking for your vote on May 19th.
Thank you, Shemia. And Jamie, your closing statement.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting this. The Secretary of State is, in essence, an executive management role to protect our democracy, to ensure voices are heard, to hold the government accountable, and to safeguard our public resources. Policy experience is important, and I've got 9 years of that in urban and rural communities, but executive management experience is critical, and I'm the only one in this race with it. I'm also, in terms of the voices that we need to hear more voices across Oregon, and those whose voices are not being heard in Salem, not being heard in the legislature, are the folks who are endorsing and supporting me. That's the distinction. Statewide leadership is really critical this time. Strong values, experience, accountability, and demeanor. Our Oregon legislature, we were embarrassed by national news recently of the continued walkouts, and we need results, not more fighting. In 2018, I and those of us here in Central Oregon showed the power of bringing Oregonians together when we had the largest swing of any congressional race nationwide, won counties that a Democrat hasn't won in almost 50 years. And my 145,000 votes were 3 to 5 times those of my colleagues in this race. And we're going to need to be able to build those relationships to win statewide. It's also about national leadership. I'm focused on establishing fair elections, not just here, but nationwide. I know a lot of folks are excited that I would be the first out lesbian Secretary of State elected nationwide, but what national experience and national support and leadership really means in making sure all voices are heard. Last year, Oregonians asked me to run for Secretary of State. In the meetings I held around our state, because they know I'm accountable to people, not to corporations, not to special, fossil fuel or opioid money. And that Secretary of State is ultimately about good governance. It's not about setting up to run for governor in 2022. I'm not going to. I've made that commitment and I honor my commitments. I stick with something when I've set up for it. I'm not gonna jump and move to the next big offer. I'm committed to Oregonians on this. This pandemic is showing the importance of leadership, experience in managing through crisis, and the ability to work with others across our state. And it's got to be about all of us, not just certain voices. It's about healing the divides and rebuilding the public trust. You know, that's my tracker. You know, that's who I am. And that's why I'm asking for your support for Secretary of State. We've got our website, more information, Jamie for Oregon, but let's work together. We're going to get through this together. Thank you very much. And you and your family stay safe.
Thank you. And thank you to Shemia Fagan, Jamie McLeod-Skinner, and Mark Hass for participating in today's forum. And thanks to the League of Women Voters for partnering with City Club to get this information out. Remember, if you enjoyed today's forum and would like to cover the cost or help cover the cost, please consider making a donation to City Club on their website at cityclubco.org. And also a big thank you to Matt Hand for making this all happen and working through some challenges today. Matt, you are a digital pioneer, and I thank you so much. You can also hear an audio rebroadcast of today's forum on Thursday, April 16th at noon on KPOV 88.9 FM, High Desert Community Radio in Central Oregon, which will be also streaming around the world at kpov.org. You can also make a donation to the League of Women Voters on their website at LWV, Deschutes.org. Please stay engaged and watch our upcoming forums. We have 3 more coming up. Next one will be Monday, April 20th at 5:30 p.m. and it'll feature the Democrat candidates for the 2nd Congressional District. This next one will be on April 22nd at 5:30, and that'll feature the Republican candidates for the 2nd Congressional District. And our final forum, sponsored by the League of Women Voters and the City Club of Central Oregon, will feature the Democrat candidates for the position of Deschutes County Commissioners. That will take place on April 29th, Monday at 5:30 p.m. Thank you for bearing with us in all our challenges today, and thank you for your interest in keeping democracy alive. On behalf of the candidates and Matt and everyone that helped make today's possible, League of Women Voters and City Clubs, please be safe, healthy, happy, and good night. All right, Matt, are we good?